In the last video, we went ahead and set up our application to have a personal access token in the Planning Center API. This will allow us to make authenticated requests into our organization to people. And so we'll be using that now to create a Sinatra application in order to submit those API requests. Now, the first thing we need to do is actually look at Sinatra. So if we look at, I think it's sinatrarb.com. This is what we're going to be using. If you're not familiar with Sinatra, it's a DSL for web applications, but it's a lot smaller and a lot less complex than Rails. For our situation, we really don't need that much that Rails provides. So we're going to be using Sinatra just to keep it small and to keep it simple. So the first things you need to do is create a gem file. So actually, I'm going to create a directory for our Ruby stuff. So I'm going to make it Ruby, go into Ruby, and then we're going to create a gem file. We'll do that in here. Go into Ruby, and I'll create gem file. And our source is going to be Ruby Gems, rubygems.org. And we're going to want Sinatra. We're also going to want the PCO API gem. And I'll show you information on that here in a second. So let me save that. If you go to the Planning Center documentation, the API documentation here, you'll notice that libraries, we provide one for Ruby called PCO API. It is a gem. You can install it and use it in any application you want that you create. And get some usage information here, some examples. But it just simply makes making API requests a lot easier in your application, which easy is good. So let's go ahead and utilize that in our application as well. So we've got our gem file. So let's bundle install those gems. All right, we have them. So the next thing we need to do is create a server file. I'm just going to call mine server.rb. And if we look back on the Sinatra web page here, this is really all you need to do to get going with Sinatra. So I'm going to paste that and format it better. And we'll see what it does. So to start a Sinatra server, you just do Ruby and then call the file. So we have a server running our local host. In this case, it's 4567 is the port, which is nice because our JavaScript port is 1234. So they fit nicely with each other. So let's go to localhost 4567. Sorry, the route was Frank says. So let's go to /Frank says. /Frank says. There we go. Put this in your pipe and smoke it. Perfect. So we don't need Frank says. Let's delete that. Save it. We will go ahead and require our PCO API gem. And we're also going to be working with JSON. So I'm also going to go ahead and require some JSON. A couple other things we're going to need is we're going to be making JavaScript requests to our application. And JavaScript to servers that aren't on the same domain tend to have CORS problems. It's basically authentication problems as they go from one domain to the other. So I'm just going to bypass those with a little snippet here. So I'm going to grab here and paste that. Before every request, we're going to set this header to access control, allow origin, all. And the same with the options request. Some browsers do an options request before they allow a post, just to make sure that they are allowed to use the API endpoint. I'm going to turn off my fly check here so we're not getting a bunch of those errors. I'm not as concerned with formatting on these videos as I am as if I'm working in Planning Center proper. All right, let me save that. Let's go ahead and just do a git and just make sure we're still working here, and we'll just respond with hi. So let's not go to Frank says anymore, but just the root. And oh, I need to restart the server. So let's stop that and restart the server, reload, and we do get our hi. Perfect. The other thing I want to check is I do want to check the response here from localhost just to make sure that we are getting the headers that we need. Come on up here. Headers for the response, access control, allow origin, all. Perfect. Okay. So what we want to do is create an endpoint that allows a post to it and will eventually post to the Planning Center API along with our authentication. To do that, we need to define a post route. And in this case, I'm just going to do API/pre-register. And within there, for now, let's just respond with the body that we receive. Just echo back what we get, just so we can test things. So back in our project here, let me go back. Let me open up our form, a JavaScript form. So source form.js, and instead of just console logging the payload, let's try submitting it. Let's try posting it. So we're going to use fetch here, HTTP localhost, and the 4567 was the port, and we're doing API/pre-register. We are going to need to provide an object here because we're doing method post, and we're providing a body to our post. We're going to stringify our payload. So stringify our payload. Once we do that, we're going to get back a response, and as we've determined in Sinatra, we're just going to respond with the body, which in this case is going to be JSON. So let's get that back. So we're going to decode the JSON, and then let's also just console log that out just to see what we get. Save that. All right, so the nice thing about Parcel is it reloads this automatically, so we don't have to do it again. So I'm just going to put some junk here and submit and see what we do. We do get a 404 because of Sinatra does not know this ditty. We're going to localhost 4567 API pre-register. Let's double check to make sure it's getting that. It did get that, but I don't think I restarted the server. So let's try restarting the server and submitting again. We did get the payload, and we got the post. There was a successful post here, and this is the array we got back from Sinatra. And again, you can see this is basically just what we sent it. Not real exciting. Okay, we also want to, instead of having all the people just be on the top level, let's contain them under maybe a people object. So say people, and have that map over this. So I return those for that, and then we need to close off that payload. And make sure I've got my endings correct here. Nope, need one more of those. That's correct, and that's correct. We don't need that anymore. And we don't need that anymore. Okay, there we go. So now our payload is going to have a top-level people data key, which is good. That'll help us on the Ruby side. All right, just to check that out, let me reload. Oh, I guess I already reloaded. In this case, I'm going to Jeffrey Lessel, submit it. What do we get back? People, and in our people, we have one person, and it is Jeffrey Lessel. Perfect. Now, moving on. Back on the Sinatra side, we want to do a couple things. Since the Planning Center API doesn't currently allow you to create people and households at the exact same time, we need to create the people first. So you can create a household and add all the people, but the people have to be created already. They have to have an ID. So we're going to need to get back the people IDs that we've created and add those, use those IDs to add them to a household. So we're going to be making two different requests here. One, to create all the people. We can do that. Well, we'll do that one at a time. So multiple requests depending on how many people are submitted in the household. So we're going to submit each one request for each person that comes in, and then also one more to create the household with all those people IDs. So let's how we're going to do that. Let's figure that out. Thankfully, we do have the PCO API gem to help us out. One thing we are going to need, the first thing we need. Let's take a look at the PCO API implementation. It says first we need to authenticate with HTTP Basic. We're going to use that. That's the personal access token. We're not using OAuth 2, but we are using this one. So let's go ahead and do that. So first we need to set up the API model here, the API class. And so I'm just going to copy that and paste it right in here. Oh, that's not in there. There we go. And our auth token is not token, and it's not secret. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an external class that basically just holds my authentication secrets. That way, my requests will work, but you're not going to be able to see my tokens because they're supposed to be secret. So I'm going to make those real quick. Actually, I'll show you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to create a new file called auth.rb, class auth, and then I'm going to have these just be constants. So the first thing we need is the token. So I'll put my token, I'll replace that off camera, and then my secret equals my secret, and then we'll end. I think Ruby likes these to be frozen because they are constants. So I'm going to close that and come back as soon as I replace those. Okay, now that I've replaced the secrets, I'm going to first of all kill that register, so that buffer, so I don't accidentally reveal it. But I'm going to use that auth class here. So I call mine token, auth token, and then auth secret. And that way it's in a separate file. You can change it as necessary, but not have to touch this in case you need a new personal access token for some reason. All right, now we have our API set up. Let's take a look at the next steps that it says in the gem usage. We can it says to execute a request, use get, post, patch, or delete. This API actually works with all the different applications. So we're going to be using it with people. So first we say API.people, and then .v2. All our API endpoints right now are under v2. And we're going to be doing v2 people, and then .post. And that's where we'll need to include the data tag, or object, rather, including the type and the attributes. So let me bring this up into a different tab here so we have both of these things up at the same time. All right, let's see what we can do. So back in our Sinatra application, we're going to take all the different people in our people map from the JSON that's submitted and create a new person for each of those. We're going to need to, Sinatra has a thing, or I guess it's rack really, where we can rewind the body. First we need to do that and parse the JSON. So JSON equals JSON parse, and rewind back to the beginning of the body and get that. Next thing we need to do with the JSON is I want to look for all the people. So map over each of those people and say new person. Go ahead and close that out. So for each person, we want to create them through the API. So let's say API people v2 people post, and then this is where we're going to need to do a little bit of extra stuff, because as you can see in the documentation here, it's going to require data, and then under data type person, and then the attributes. We don't have an ID yet, so we don't have to include that, but we do need to include the type and the attributes under a data tag. So we'll say post, and then let's create an object here. Actually, we don't need to. We can do that here. Data, and then type is a person. Don't have an ID, and then our attributes are that person JSON payload attributes. And then close out the object and close out the method call. Now that should get us a map of the new people that we've gotten, because this will return the person created. So by the time, let's go ahead and capture that. Response equals, and let's return the response so we can view it in our browser. Okay, one thing I noticed is this rewind here actually needs to be outside of the parse. So let's post that here. And instead of rewind, we actually need to read. So we can do request body read. So that'll be our JSON. And we're going to respond with the response. You can see my previous error there. So let's try submitting that. And again, we have a 200 in our post, but we expected a colon after property name and object at line 1 in the JSON data. So let's take a look at what the response was from our Sinatra application. Response, we do have a data, but it's in an array. That probably shouldn't be the case. I'm not sure why it's in an array. Oh, I know why, because we mapped over the people here, and it stored that in the response. So that's why it's in the array. Instead of providing the response here, so we know that at least we're hitting the API. In fact, if we go to Planning Center, people.planning center, we can see our API call first here actually did come through. So it was created correctly and successfully, which is good news. But we need to create more of them here, and we need to do it without errors. So let's do that. Since we're mapping over these, the thing that's is returned from the server is the person created. And another thing I realized is we don't need to take to say the type is person, because that's implied here with the people. So the API will know what to do with that. So we can actually just make this a lot easier. Right there. So we take a look at that. When we get the person back, we want to just map over the IDs, because that's eventually what we're going to need to create the household. So the person is going to be the new response, data, and then ID. Another thing we can do is take a look at the Explorer, the API Explorer. If you go to people here, we can get information from our database directly, which is kind of fun. So in this case, we got our people. I'd like to look at order by created app. And so this is the person who's created last. Let's take a look at him. So this should be our API call first. Yes, it is. So API call first is here. He was created just a little bit ago. So again, you can tell that it's being created. And you can see, again, all the attributes that are returned here. We can obviously update and create most of those things, but we don't want to right now. We just want to stick with the ones we've got for now. Again, feel free to modify that as your needs require. All right, so back to our form here. We want the data and then the ID. So back to the Explorer, you'll see here, this is the data that's returned, like anything under the 7. So we have type and we have ID. So ID is outside of attributes, and that's the thing we want in order to send to the household, to create the household. All right, so we're getting close here. So we're going to have an array of the IDs of the things we just created. Perfect. Now we want to do another post that creates the household. So API people, v2, household post. And this one's a little bit different, maybe a little bit tricky. So let's go take a look at the documentation. Back to our documentation, go to documentation, people, let's do the latest version here. And let's take a look at the household. Now we have a note in here. So to create a new household, you must specify the primary contact and the people as relationships. And you can see it provides a JSON payload here as an example. So we need the data as the top level, and then under there, attributes, the name of the household. So in this case, the household is just going to be named Smith. And then outside of attributes, as kind of a sibling, is relationships. And under those relationships, we have people, and that's another object key. And then under those people, we have data, and then an array of the different people in the households. So in this case, we're going to need to take those that array of people IDs we got back from our people creation and put them in here. And then finally, we can add a primary contact. We'll just add the first person as the primary contact. In fact, if we don't do that, it'll do it on its own. So we should be able to be fine without providing a primary contact there. But we still need to provide the name and the relationships. So let's do that. So at the top level, we have data. So then we have attributes. And remember, our attributes, only the name is the thing that matters. So in this case, let's take the first person's last name and just say that household. So the people that we get back here is the JSON people. So JSON people, and we'll do the first one in the array, 0. And then from there, we'll do last name. Actually, let's destruct that, or interpolate that, and then just put household on the end of that. So it's going to be the Doe household or the Lessel household. Now, relationships is a sibling to attributes, as we can see here. And again, we're going to need people as a key, and then underneath people, more data. So people and then data. Now in here is actually an array of the people that we are going to be including here. So we got to include a type person and the ID. So all of them are going to be type person. That's no problem. And then this is going to be where we have to map over the IDs. So instead of creating the array directly, let's say that the response, actually, let's rename this from response. It's no longer response, it's person IDs. Person IDs. So the data is person IDs map. And for each of the IDs, we want to return an object. So we want to return the type person, and then ID is the ID. and that should be our full payload for the households. And that should create all of them, include the name as well. All right, 2 more things we want to do before we move on. One is I just realized that this should be the plural, so households post. And the second is we no longer have a response to return. So instead, let's just return the response that we get back from Planning Center when we post this household creation. So let's save that. Make sure to restart the server. Okay. And then let's go ahead and redo this too, just to make sure we have the latest of everything. So this is going to be API call second. Let's provide more information here. And let's actually try a second person. So API callette second, female. Let's submit that. You can see it's hitting our backend. And we do get a 200, but a bad JSON. And we can see here it's actually an array. So that's going to be the issue back from Planning Center. So we're not going to really need that anyway, but it was nice to see that, even though it provided an error. So what we want to do here is let's take a look at our people and see if we now have API call second and API callette second. And you can see here that it actually created a household with both of them in there. It only created the name household, which is unfortunate. It should be second household. So let's double check that and see what we did wrong there. In this case, we have JSON people, correct? And then looking at the first one, and then, yeah, I see what I did. So remember, the actual data is within the attributes tag here. So let's try it all again and restart the server and see what we get. All right, let's try submitting that again. And we will be getting another household here. So more people, the new ones. Okay, I think I did have it. It just was, I didn't restart the server. That can happen. That's another reason why I love the automatic reloads. So we do have third household here. It does contain all our people, including the child. That's perfect. And we get our female, adult, pick all call. Oh, that was the callette. Let's try call. It is a male adult, and API callette is a female child. Perfect. So instead of the response from here, we just want to respond with 200. So that was a success. Now, we save that, and I'm going to go and restart the server now while I'm thinking about it, because we're going to be done with this server for now. The last thing we want to do is go back to our React form, and instead of doing anything with the response, which we don't really need, let's add another state that knows when this form was submitted. So in this case, we're going to need a new state. We're going to say, how about form submitted, and set form submitted equals use state, and we're going to start it out with false. We're going to initialize it with false. And then we're going to, don't really care about the response from the server as long as it is a good response, a success. We want to set form submitted as true. Okay. Now back in our, let me save that so we get some formatting on it. Here in our return, our render, we want to render 2 different things. If the form is submitted, we don't want to render the form fields anymore. Instead, we just want to maybe render a thank you message. So we're going to return, and if form submitted, I'm going to use a ternary here. Form submitted, we're going to do this. Otherwise, we're going to do that. So when a form is submitted, what do we want to return? How about just an H1? Thanks, and see you on Sunday. All right, that should be all we need. Yep, okay, no errors. This reloads, and let's try submitting again. So API call fourth, and let's just have him be the only one. Submit, there we go. Thanks, and see you on Sunday. Perfect. So that is really all we need to do in our application. So there's lots of different ways you can make this much, much better. Obviously, it's ugly. It could use some error handling. I only used a then here, but it could probably also stand having a catch. And then also over here in our pre-register method, we're not doing any sort of error handling. Like what if this fails? What if your creation of the people failed? Do you want to then go ahead and create the household already? Or even though this one failed, or maybe even one of these failed, but 3 of them succeeded, do you want to create a household with 3 of them and just leave the one out? you need to figure out what you want to do with those, but that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. So really, that's the end of the tutorial session here on how to use the Planning Center API. Hopefully it was informative. It was decently quick. I mean, I took a lot of time to explain some things, but once you get it down, you can do a lot of things very quickly with the API. And the nice thing is, as I said at the beginning, is as developers here at Planning Center, we actually use most of these public API endpoints to do a lot of the features that we build even in our own applications. And more as we're moving to React and kind of reactive front ends, we are doing that more often as well. And we also have a Ruby backend too. So that is the tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is geo@pco.bz or geo@planning.center would work as well. And thanks for watching. Hope you learned something.